In a room where fortunes changed hands over bourbon and blood money, the most dangerous persons scrubbed champagne glasses. The Magnolia Room occupied the dark heart of Chicago's meatpacking district, a cathedral of sin dressed in velvet and crystal. The air hung thick with expensive perfume and cheaper lies. Jazz drifted from the stage where a quartet worked through Dixieland standards, the trumpet hitting notes that sounded like heartbreaks set to rhythm. Magnolia flowers bloomed white and pink in crystal vases on every table, their scent mixing with cigar smoke and the particular cologne of money earned in darkness. Claire Morrison moved through this world like a ghost, 24 years old and invisible by design. Her black uniform hung 2 sizes too large, deliberately chosen to hide the curve of her waist and the strength in her shoulders. Her hair stayed twisted in a tight bun, severe and forgettable. She kept her eyes down, her posture slouched, her entire being calibrated to avoid notice. It was a survival mechanism. She worked the ground floor, the territory of ordinary criminals. Men who thought $100,000 made them powerful. Women who wore diamonds bought with other people's suffering. Claire collected their empty glasses and listened to their careless confessions. 6 months she had been here, 6 months of being nobody. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, stacking crystal onto her tray. The weight centered perfectly. Years of piano training had given her that, the ability to feel balance in her fingertips. She counted as she worked, a quiet rhythm in her mind. Table 4, 3 bourbon glasses, 1 martini. Table 7, champagne flutes, lipstick stains and shades of red ambition. Table 12, cognac snifters, still half full, abandoned when the deal went bad. Each glass represented 15 cents closer to the impossible sum she needed, $47,000. That was what stood between her brother Ethan and death. Stage 3 leukemia didn't care about impossibility. The experimental treatment waited in Baltimore, priced beyond the reach of a waitress who made $9 an hour plus tips. She was $142 short this week, again. The floor manager barked her name from across the room. Rick, sweating through his polyester suit, forever wiping his forehead with a handkerchief that had seen better decades. He gestured frantically toward the private elevator at the back of the club. Claire's stomach tightened. The elevator only went one place. The garden room, the VIP section where real power sat in leather chairs and decided who lived and who disappeared into Lake Michigan wearing concrete shoes. She had never been summoned there. Staff didn't go to the garden room unless something had gone very wrong or very right. Claire specialized in neither. She specialized in invisible. But Rick was moving toward her now, his face flushed with panic or excitement, or both. "Table needs clearing," he said, close enough that she could smell the fierce sweat under his department store cologne. "VIP section, fast." Claire's training kicked in before her fear could. The training her father had drilled into her every day from age 8 until the car accident that wasn't an accident took him when she was 14. Awareness is survival, Claire Bear. Always know your exits. Always know who's watching. She scanned the room. 3 exits visible from her position. 4 security cameras she had counted on her first day. 6 bodyguards stationed at strategic points, their jackets cut to hide the weapons everyone knew they carried. The music was exactly 4 beats per measure. The trumpet player's fingers moving in patterns she had memorized weeks ago. Everything normal. Everything wrong. "Now, Vance," Rick hissed, using the fake last name she had given him. She had been Claire Vance here, not Claire Morrison. One more layer of invisible between her real self and this world. She followed him toward the back of the club. The hierarchy of the Magnolia Room revealed itself in vertical layers. Ground floor for the hopeful criminals. The mezzanine for mid-level operators, men who controlled blocks instead of neighborhoods. And above it all, behind velvet curtains, the color of old blood, the garden room. The name came from the centerpiece, an actual magnolia tree, 30 feet tall, growing from an opening in the floor. Someone had spent a fortune engineering the impossible, bringing Southern earth and Southern roots to a Chicago penthouse. The tree bloomed year-round under artificial sun, white flowers the size of dinner plates, perfuming the air with memories of a different world. Claire had only glimpsed it once through an open door. The image had stayed with her. Beauty and power growing from the same soil. Rick stopped at the base of the private staircase. His hand shook as he pointed upward. "Just clear the table and get out," he whispered. "Don't look at anyone. Don't speak unless spoken to. And for God's sake, don't drop anything." "What's happening tonight?" Claire asked. Her voice came out steady. Another thing her father had taught her. Never let them hear the fear. "Anniversary," Rick said. "Mr. Beaumont's father. Died 15 years ago today. The whole family's coming. Evangeline Beaumont herself. The name landed like a fist to Claire's chest. Everyone knew Evangeline Beaumont, the matriarch. The woman who had fled New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, bringing her son and her dead husband's empire north. The woman who ruled Chicago's underworld with a smile that could cut glass and a memory that forgot nothing. Claire's hands started to tremble. She clenched them into fists. I just bust tables, Rick. I don't do VIP service. Sarah called in sick. Jessica showed up drunk. You're sober and you're here. That makes you tonight's waitress. He grabbed her arm, his grip desperate. You want to keep this job? You want to make rent? You want to pay for whatever hospital bills you're drowning in? She thought of Ethan, pale against white sheets, hopeful despite the poison they pumped into his veins every week, trusting his big sister to find a way. She always found a way. Okay, Claire whispered. I'll do it. Rick released her arm. For a moment, something that might have been sympathy crossed his face. Then the business mask returned. Good girl. There's a tray in this prep station. Coffee service. Traditional New Orleans style. Don't screw it up. He walked away, leaving Claire at the base of the stairs. She looked up. The garden room waited. She touched the small cross at her neck, her grandmother's rosary bead she wore on a chain. The bead was hollow. Inside it, a micro SD card held everything her father had collected before they killed him. Insurance, he had called it. Secrets that powerful men would kill to protect. She had never looked at the files. Looking meant choosing a side. Choosing meant becoming visible. Invisible meant dead. Claire climbed the stairs. The garden room existed in a different dimension. The rough glamour of the ground floor disappeared here, replaced by old-world elegance. Antebellum architecture transplanted north. Crown molding hand-carved with magnolia blossoms. Chandeliers that had hung in plantation houses before the Civil War. Leather chairs worn soft by 3 generations of criminals discussing business over cognac and Cuban cigars. The magnolia tree dominated the center of the space, its branches spreading a canopy of dark leaves and white flowers. The air smelled of earth and perfume, and power that had learned to wait. Claire found the prep station in a small alcove behind silk screens. The coffee service sat waiting on a silver tray that probably cost more than her car. An antique coffee pot, heavy and ornate. Porcelain cups so thin she could see light through them. A silver bowl of beignets, fresh enough that powdered sugar still dusted their surfaces. Small glasses for cognac. And in a crystal vial, orange flower water. She recognized the setup. Her grandmother had shown her this ritual. The traditional New Orleans coffee service, reserved for important occasions. For honoring the dead, for sealing deals that required witnesses higher than human law. Claire's hands steadied as she lifted the tray. The weight centered perfectly. She could do this, serve the coffee, disappear back into invisible, collect her pay, survive another week. The silk screens parted as she entered the main room. Every instinct her father had drilled into her screamed awareness. 6 men stood around the perimeter. Not regular bodyguards. These moved differently, military training visible in their posture. Former Marines or Army Rangers, now employed by men who paid better than Uncle Sam and asked fewer questions about conscience. They watched her with professional assessment. Threat level, minimal. 115 pounds of terrified waitress. They dismissed her and returned to watching the real threats. The center table had been set for one. The throne, people called it. A chair that had supposedly belonged to a French governor of Louisiana, brought north piece by piece and reassembled here. High-backed, carved with magnolia blossoms and French lilies. The wood was dark with age, in the particular patina that comes from powerful hands gripping it through generations. The chair sat empty, waiting. Claire set the tray down on a service table. Her training took over. Years of piano recitals had taught her to perform under pressure. Her hands didn't shake as she arranged the coffee service. The pot positioned just so, the cups aligned, the beignets on their delicate china plate, the cognac glasses catching light like promises of warmth. Everything perfect, everything precise, everything wrong. The coffee smelled off, not bad, just wrong. Commercial beans instead of the traditional Café du Monde chicory blend her grandmother had insisted on. The beignets were fresh but machine-made, lacking the irregular beauty of hand preparation. And someone had forgotten the most important element. There was no hint of orange flower water in the air. The vials sat unused. Claire's heart sank. Evangeline Beaumont would know. A woman who had grown up with this tradition, who had served coffee to her husband's associates in New Orleans before the world fell apart, would know immediately that this was wrong. But it wasn't Claire's place to fix it. She was invisible. She served what was prepared. She collected her pay. She survived. The music from downstairs cut off mid-phrase. The sudden silence felt like a held breath. Claire's awareness spiked. Every sense her father had sharpened went into overdrive. She counted heartbeats, hers and the 6 bodyguards, their rhythms steady and professional. Then the elevator doors opened. The temperature in the room dropped 5 degrees, not metaphorically. Claire felt it on her skin, the way she felt changes in air pressure before storms. The bodyguards straightened, hands moved fractionally closer to concealed weapons. The air itself seemed to compress. Jackson Beaumont entered first. 6'1" and moving like violence wrapped in expensive tailoring. He wore a 3-piece suit cut on Savile Row, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes that caught the light when he moved. Platinum cufflinks. A silk pocket square folded in a magnolia pattern, the white fabric stark against dark wool. His shoes were Italian leather, polished to a mirror shine that probably cost more than Claire made in 3 months. But the clothes weren't what made the room hold its breath. It was the way he moved, deliberate and economical. Every gesture calculated for maximum efficiency. He didn't walk. He claimed territory. Each step a declaration of ownership. His face belonged in Renaissance paintings of dark angels, strong jaw, high cheekbones, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile and didn't miss the ability. But it was his eyes that stopped Claire's breath. Storm gray. The color of Lake Michigan before a winter squall. Eyes that saw everything and calculated the exact price of each thing they saw. Those eyes swept the room in one efficient scan. Bodyguards, exits, sightlines, and finally, dismissively, Claire. She felt his gaze move over her like cold water. Assessment complete in under 2 seconds. Threat level? None. Interest level? 0. She was furniture, part of the decor, invisible, exactly what she needed to be. A second man followed Jackson into the room. Broader, harder, moving with the particular grace of someone who had killed with his hands and expected to do so again. Buzz cut, scar tissue around his knuckles. A suit that fit perfectly over muscles that spoke of gym time and violence. Carter Wade, Jackson's best friend since childhood, his enforcer, his brother in everything but blood. Carter's eyes were different from Jackson's. Where Jackson looked and calculated, Carter looked and categorized. Friend or enemy, useful or disposable. There was no neutral ground in Carter's world. His gaze landed on Claire and stayed there a fraction too long. She kept her eyes down. Invisible. Irrelevant. Not worth noticing. Everything ready? Jackson's voice matched his appearance. Smooth and controlled. The kind of voice that never needed to be raised because everyone already understood the consequences of not listening. One of the bodyguards stepped forward. Yes, sir. The coffee service is prepared. Your mother's car just passed the checkpoint. She'll be here in 90 seconds. Jackson nodded. He moved to the magnolia tree, reaching out to touch one of the white blooms. His fingers were gentle on the petals. The gesture seemed automatic. A ritual he performed without thinking. Claire watched from her peripheral vision, careful not to stare directly. She cataloged the motion the way her father had taught her. Everyone has tells, Claire Bear. Everyone reveals themselves in the small moments when they forget to perform. Jackson Beaumont touching a flower with unexpected gentleness was a tell. It spoke of something buried under the elegant violence, something that remembered beauty. Carter positioned himself near the elevator, hands clasped behind his back in a military rest position. The bodyguards melted into the shadows, present but invisible, and Claire stood beside the service table, tray in hand, waiting for whatever came next. The elevator hummed, rising. Jackson straightened. His hand fell away from the magnolia blossom. The gentleness disappeared. The mask returned, cold, controlled. The gentleman they called him in the streets. Not because he was kind, but because he killed you with perfect manners and appropriate regret. The elevator doors opened. Evangeline Beaumont didn't enter the room. She graced it with her presence. 70 years old and moving like a woman half her age who knew exactly the power she commanded. She wore emerald green silk, the dress cut in a style from another era, the 1960s maybe, when she had been young and beautiful and dangerous in New Orleans, before the storms came and washed everything away. White gloves covered her hands. Pearl earrings caught the light. Her hair, silver and perfectly styled, swept up in a chignon that required professional skill to achieve. She carried a cane carved from magnolia wood, the handle shaped like a blossom. But she didn't lean on it. The cane was a scepter, a declaration, a weapon if necessary. Her face showed every one of her 70 years, lines carved deep by hard decisions and harder losses. A mouth that had learned to smile without warmth. Eyes like her son's, storm gray and calculating. But where Jackson's eyes assessed value, Evangeline's eyes judged worth, and found most people wanting. She paused in the doorway. The entire room held its breath. Even the magnolia tree seemed to stop growing for a moment, waiting for her verdict on whether this space was worthy of her presence. Jackson stepped forward, offering his arm with Old South courtesy. "Mama," he said, just the single word, perfectly pronounced with the soft vowels of Louisiana still present despite 20 years in Chicago. "Welcome." Evangeline's eyes swept the room. Claire felt that gaze pass over her and keep moving. Invisible. "Good. Jackson, darling." Her voice carried the weight of molasses and broken glass. Sweet Louisiana accent wrapping around words that could cut. "This place still smells of Yankee money and poor breeding." Several of the bodyguards shifted uncomfortably. Claire kept her expression neutral. She had heard worse, had survived worse. Words couldn't hurt her anymore. "It's profitable, Mama," Jackson replied, his tone patient. The tone of a man who had had this conversation 1,000 times and would have it 1,000 more. "Your father built a legacy." Evangeline moved past her son, leaning on his arm but not needing it. "You run a saloon." The barb landed. Claire saw Jackson's jaw tighten for a fraction of a second, then smooth again. Control reasserted. He guided his mother to the throne, the chair that had waited for her. She sat with the grace of old training. Finishing school in New Orleans probably, before the civil rights movement and the sexual revolution and all the other forces that changed the South. Evangeline Beaumont existed in a time capsule of manners and murder, equally fluent in both. The room exhaled. Jackson took his position standing beside his mother's chair. Carter moved to flank the other side. The bodyguards resumed their watch. And Claire, invisible Claire, waited for her cue to serve. Evangeline's eyes closed. For a moment, the hard mask slipped, and Claire saw something else underneath. Grief, raw and fresh despite 15 years. The anniversary of her husband's death. Augustus Beaumont, who had built the empire and died protecting his son from a bullet meant for the next generation. When Evangeline's eyes opened again, the grief was gone, replaced by the steel that had kept her alive in a world designed to destroy women who reached for power. "Coffee," she said. One word, a command that expected instant obedience. Claire's cue. She lifted the heavy silver tray and stepped forward. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But Ethan needed her, needed the money this job provided, needed his big sister to be brave even when courage felt like walking into fire. She approached the throne, head down, eyes lowered, invisible. The tray settled onto the table without a sound. Claire's hands, steadied by years of piano discipline, began the ritual her grandmother had taught her. Pour the dark coffee into the thin porcelain cup. The liquid steamed in the cool air, smelling of chicory and broken promises. Add the cognac glass, position the beignet plate, everything precise, everything perfect, everything wrong. Claire turned to leave, to disappear back into invisible, to survive another night. "Wait," the word cracked like a whip. Claire froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs hard enough she thought everyone must hear it. She turned slowly, eyes still down, waiting. Evangeline lifted the coffee cup, sipped. Her face transformed. Pleasure became disgust in the space between heartbeats. She set the cup down with deliberate care that somehow felt more violent than throwing it. "What is this?" Not in English. In Louisiana Creole, the old dialect that Claire's grandmother had spoken at home. The language that was dying, kept alive only by old women and memories. Nobody responded. The bodyguards didn't speak Creole. Jackson frowned, understanding some of it, but not all. Carter looked confused. Claire understood every word, but she kept her mouth shut. Invisible people didn't speak unless spoken to. Evangeline switched to English, her voice rising. "This is garbage." Jackson leaned down, his voice low and soothing. "Mama, it's imported coffee, the best we could find." "It's wrong," Evangeline's hand swept across the table. The coffee cup flew through the air in a beautiful arc of disaster. Time slowed. Claire watched the cup tumble end over end, watched the dark liquid separate into droplets, watched trajectory and gravity conspire toward catastrophe. The coffee hit Tommy, the young busboy, barely 17, who had been approaching with a water pitcher. The scalding liquid splashed across his hand and wrist. He yelped, a sound of pure, surprised pain. The water pitcher fell from his grip. Crystal met marble. Glass exploded into 1,000 glittering pieces. Silence crashed down, absolute and terrible. Tommy clutched his burned hand, tears streaming down his face, too terrified to make another sound. The broken glass spread around him like evidence of an unforgivable crime. Evangeline stood. All eyes turned to her. She wasn't looking at the burned boy. She was looking at her shoes. Ferragamo heels, probably worth $3,000. Coffee had splashed across the green leather. Idiots! Her voice dropped to something more dangerous than shouting. Imbeciles, on your father's death anniversary, Jackson, and you surround me with peasants who cannot even serve proper coffee. She turned her fury on Tommy. The boy backed away, still clutching his burned hand. Claire saw him clearly, saw the terror, saw the pain, saw her brother Ethan in every line of his frightened face. You ruined my shoes, Evangeline said, her voice honey and arsenic. Do you know what these cost? More than your pathetic life is worth. She raised her cane. The magnolia wood caught the light. She raised it like a weapon, like judgment, like the Old Testament God her grandmother had believed in, all wrath and retribution. Claire's world narrowed to that moment. The cane rising, Tommy's terrified face. Evangeline's rage that had nothing to do with shoes or coffee and everything to do with grief she couldn't express any other way. And Claire, invisible Claire, who had spent 6 months being nobody, made a choice. Stop. The word came out stronger than she intended. It cut through the room like a gunshot. Every head turned. Every bodyguard's hand moved toward concealed weapons. Jackson's eyes snapped to her face, really seeing her for the first time. Evangeline lowered her cane slowly, turned to face this waitress who dared to give her commands. The room held its breath. Claire looked up, met those storm gray eyes that judged and found wanting. Her grandmother's voice echoed in memory. Sometimes, Claire Bear, invisible isn't enough. Sometimes you have to be seen. She spoke in Louisiana Creole, the old dialect. The aristocratic version that her grandmother had learned as a girl in the Garden District before integration, in white flight, in all the forces that broke the old New Orleans. The words came out perfect, accent flawless, grammar precise. Forgive the boy, madame. He does not understand the weight of this day. But your anger is not about shoes. It is not about coffee. The room gasped, actual audible gasps from men who had seen people killed and never blinked. Claire had revealed herself. Shattered invisible, stepped into the light. She continued, her voice gentle but firm. You are angry because the coffee tastes wrong, because they used commercial beans instead of Café du Monde with chicory, because the beignets are machine-made, because they forgot the orange flower water. She stepped over the broken glass, heedless of the shards crunching under her sensible shoes, stepped closer to the throne where Evangeline stood frozen in shock. It doesn't taste like home, Claire said, still in that dying language. It doesn't taste like memory. It tastes like loss, and that is why it hurts. Evangeline's cane lowered completely. Her mouth opened slightly. The rage drained from her face, replaced by something Claire couldn't read. Wonder, recognition, the particular pain of hearing your native tongue spoken properly by a stranger who shouldn't exist. Orange flower water, Evangeline whispered. How did you know about that? Claire switched to English but kept her tone respectful. My grandmother, Colette Duvernay. She was from the Garden District in New Orleans. She taught me the language, the traditions. She said if we forget where we came from, we have nothing left. It was a careful lie built on a foundation of truth. Her grandmother had been from New Orleans, had taught her Creole, but Colette Morrison, not Duvernay. And she had been a music teacher, not old Garden District aristocracy. But the details were close enough to truth that they would survive casual inspection. Evangeline studied Claire's face for 20 seconds that felt like 20 years. The silence stretched. Jackson watched his mother. Carter watched Jackson. The bodyguards watched everything. And Claire stood in the center of it all, no longer invisible, waiting for judgment. Then Evangeline did something that shocked everyone in the room. She smiled. Not the cold smile she wore like armor, a real smile, small and genuine and vulnerable. She pointed one gloved finger at the empty chair across from her throne. Sit down, child. Rick, the floor manager, materialized from the shadows, his face pale with horror. Ma'am, she's just the help. I can explain. Quiet. Evangeline didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. The command in that single word would have stopped armies. I said sit. She looked at Jackson. Have someone tend to that boy's burn and bring fresh coffee. Proper coffee this time. Jackson stared at Claire for a long moment. His expression shifted through several calculations she couldn't read. Then he nodded once. Carter moved to help Tommy, who looked like he couldn't believe he was still alive. One of the bodyguards disappeared toward the kitchen. Jackson himself moved to the coffee service, picked up a clean cup with his own hands, poured coffee from the pot that Claire now realized he must have known was wrong. He had known, and he had let it be served anyway, testing his mother, or testing fate, or simply not caring enough about details to check. He placed the cup before Claire with the same old South courtesy he had shown his mother. But there was something else in the gesture now. Attention. She had become interesting. And in Jackson Beaumont's world, interesting could mean opportunity or danger in equal measure. Claire sat. The chair was antique Louis XIV, probably worth $20,000. She perched on the edge, spine straight. Years of piano lessons had given her perfect posture. Her hands folded in her lap, hiding the tremor that wanted to show. Evangeline leaned forward, studying Claire like a painting she was considering purchasing. "What is your name, child?" "Claire." The surname stuck in her throat. Morrison would lead to questions. Vance was already suspect. She settled for incomplete truth. "Claire." Evangeline tasted the name. "You speak like my grandmother did. The old Creole. Not the bastardized version they speak now in what's left of New Orleans. You learned from someone who knew." It wasn't a question, but Claire answered anyway. "My grandmother insisted on proper grammar. She said language carried history. Let the language die and the history dies with it." Wise woman. Evangeline lifted her fresh coffee cup, sipped, and wrinkled her nose. Still wrong, but less insulting than before. She set the cup down and fixed Claire with those storm gray eyes. "You speak the tongue of the Garden District. Old families, French Creole aristocracy. Where exactly in the Garden District did your grandmother live?" The trap in the question was obvious. Test Claire's knowledge, catch her in a lie, expose her as an imposter trading on stolen culture. But Claire's grandmother had lived in New Orleans, had known the Garden District even if she hadn't lived there, had told stories about the streets and the families and the way the world had been before it all washed away. "Near the corner of Prytania and 3rd, Claire said, picking a real address from memory. She said she could hear the streetcar from her bedroom window, said the sound used to put her to sleep. Truth, her grandmother had said exactly that. The details specific enough to be believable, general enough to be unverifiable. Evangeline's eyes narrowed. Calculating. Then she did something that made Claire's blood freeze. She smiled wider. "Bring the board," Evangeline said to the room at large. "The ivory set. I want to play chess." Carter groaned from his position near the elevator. "Evangeline, please. We have the senator arriving at 11. The union representatives at midnight. They can wait." Evangeline waved one gloved hand dismissively. "I want to see if this girl has breeding or just luck." Jackson leaned against the magnolia tree, arms crossed. A predator watching prey with interest. "Mama, I'm not playing chess with a waitress." "You are." Evangeline's voice turned steel. "She fixed my coffee. She knows my culture. Humor me. Unless you're afraid a girl who scrubs tables might beat you." The challenge hung in the air. Claire saw Jackson's jaw tighten. Pride. The universal weakness of powerful men. She had just watched his mother manipulate him with surgical precision. Jackson pushed off from the tree, straightened his cufflinks. "Fine, but don't expect me to go easy on her." Carter disappeared and returned moments later with a wooden box. He set it on the table between Claire and Jackson with more force than necessary. His eyes met Claire's for a fraction of a second. She saw the warning there. "You're making a mistake. You're drawing attention. Attention gets people killed." He opened the box. Inside, an antique chess set, ivory and ebony pieces, hand-carved with magnolia blossoms integrated into the traditional designs. The board was inlaid marble, black and white squares polished to a mirror finish. The set was probably worth more than her car, more than everything she owned. Jackson sat across from Claire. He rolled up his sleeves with deliberate precision. The gesture revealed forearms marked with old scars. Knife wounds, probably. Reminders that his elegant suits covered a body that knew violence intimately. "Do you know the rules, Claire?" His voice carried just enough condescension to sting. "Or should I explain how the pieces move?" Every person in the room watched, waiting for her to back down, to admit she was in over her head, to return to invisible, where she belonged. Claire looked at the board. 64 squares, infinite possibilities. Her father's voice echoed across the years. "Chess is music, Claire Bear. Every piece has a rhythm. Learn the patterns and you conduct the symphony." She had played her first game at age 6, had competed in junior tournaments until her father's death ended everything. had spent countless evenings at their secondhand piano, chessboard balanced on top, learning how strategy and art were the same language spoken in different dialects. I know the rules, she said quietly. Her hand reached out, steady despite everything, and moved her king's pawn forward 2 squares. E4. Jackson's eyebrows rose a fraction. He matched her opening. E5. The game began. Jackson played like he moved, aggressive and efficient. He developed his pieces with the speed of someone who had learned chess from masters and practiced against killers. His knight jumped forward in a standard opening gambit. His bishop slid into position to support. Every move calculated for maximum pressure. Claire played defense, responding to his attacks, giving ground slowly. Her pieces retreated and regrouped. She looked like she was losing. Looked like a waitress in over her head, overwhelmed by a better player. She was counting, watching patterns. Her father had taught her this too. Everyone has tells, Claire Bear. In chess and in life. Find the pattern and you find the weakness. Jackson favored his queen side. 73% of his attacks came from that direction. He smiled slightly before moving his knights, a tell so small most players would miss it. And he was impatient. Aggressive players always were. They wanted the kill, wanted to see their opponent crushed under the weight of their superior strategy. By move 10, Jackson had taken her knight and bishop. He leaned back, confident. Around the table, Carter shook his head. Evangeline sipped her coffee and said nothing. The bodyguards had stopped paying attention. Claire moved her queen to an apparently defensive position. Jackson's eyes flicked to the board. He saw the opportunity. His rook could take her queen in 2 moves. The game would be effectively over. He made the first move toward that goal, sliding his bishop into position. He was already planning his victory speech. Claire moved her remaining bishop, a sacrifice. She placed it directly in the path of Jackson's attack. Any good player would take it. Free piece. No apparent cost. Jackson paused, studied the board, looked for the trap, didn't see one. He took the bishop, his face showing satisfaction. Claire moved her knight. Check. Jackson's satisfaction flickered. He moved his king to safety. Standard response. Claire moved her rook. Check. Now Jackson's full attention focused on the board. His eyes moved rapidly over the squares, seeing for the first time that he had walked into something. That the retreating pieces had been repositioning. That the bishop sacrifice had opened a diagonal he hadn't noticed because he had been too busy seeing victory. The room grew quiet. Even the distant music from downstairs seemed to pause. Carter stepped closer, looking over Jackson's shoulder at the board. His expression shifted to surprise. Jackson had been trapped 3 moves ago. Every piece Claire had seemed to lose had actually been building a net. And now his king sat in the center of that net with nowhere to run. He made a desperate move to save his queen. Sacrificed a rook to buy space. But Claire was already 2 moves ahead. She picked up her queen, the most powerful piece on the board, placed it in apparent danger, taking Jackson's rook. What are you doing? Carter asked, confused. You just hung your queen. Claire didn't look at Carter. She kept her eyes on Jackson, waiting for him to see it. He saw it. His hand froze halfway to her exposed queen. He traced the lines. If he took her queen, her knight delivered checkmate. If he didn't take it, her bishop delivered checkmate from a different angle. No matter what he did, the game was over. Mate in 2, Claire said softly. Jackson sat back slowly. The shock on his face was genuine. For 5 long seconds, he just stared at the board, then at Claire, then back at the board. Around the table, Evangeline began to laugh, not polite amusement, real laughter, loud and delighted. She clapped her gloved hands together. Did you see that, Carter? She destroyed him, made him look like a child playing checkers. Carter's expression had shifted to something Claire couldn't quite read. Calculation, assessment, the look of a man revising his earlier judgment about threat levels. Jackson didn't laugh, didn't smile. He studied Claire with those storm gray eyes that now showed something new. Not anger, respect, and something more dangerous. Interest. Who taught you to play like that? His voice had lost the condescension. Now it carried genuine curiosity. Claire's throat tightened. Dangerous ground. Truth could expose her. Lies would crumble under investigation. She chose the narrow path between. My father, he said arrogance is the most expensive luxury in the world. She met Jackson's eyes directly for the first time. You can't afford it. The words hung between them, challenge and observation. The kind of thing that could get you killed or respected in equal measure. Jackson's mouth moved into something that might have been a smile. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was. Past tense. Let them think what they wanted. Evangeline leaned forward, her eyes bright with interest. I like this girl, Jackson. She has spine, intelligence, culture. She looked at Claire. What do you do here, child, besides serve bad coffee and humiliate my son at chess? I bust tables, ma'am. Clean glasses. Try to stay out of the way. Waste, Evangeline pronounced judgment. Absolute waste. Someone with your gifts should be doing more than scrubbing dishes. Rick appeared at the edge of the gathering, wringing his hands. Mrs. Beaumont, I apologize for any confusion. Claire is just temporary help. She wasn't supposed to be in the VIP section at all. I can remove her immediately. You'll do no such thing. Evangeline silenced him with a glance. In fact, you're fired. Your coffee service was an embarrassment. Get out of my sight. Rick's face went white. He opened his mouth to protest. Saw Evangeline's expression, closed his mouth, turned and fled. Claire's stomach dropped. The job, her lifeline, the money for Ethan, gone in an instant because she had stopped being invisible. Jackson was watching her face, seeing the calculation, the fear, the desperate math of someone living on the edge of financial catastrophe. When he spoke, his voice was soft, dangerous in its gentleness. You need money. It wasn't a question, but Claire answered anyway. Yes. How much? The truth balanced on her tongue, heavy, potentially fatal, but Jackson Beaumont was looking at her like he saw through invisible, all the way down to desperate truth. My brother is sick, stage 3 leukemia. The experimental treatment costs money I don't have. Jackson pulled out his phone, tapped the screen several times with practiced efficiency. Claire watched him access databases she didn't know existed, her entire life scrolling across his screen in a matter of seconds. Ethan Morrison, St. Catherine's Hospital, age 19, 4 months behind on treatment costs, outstanding debt of $47,000. He looked up from the phone. You're not Claire Vance. You're Claire Morrison. The floor dropped out from under her world. He knew, had known, or just discovered. Either way, the game changed. Truth was the only card she had left to play. Yes. Why the fake name? Because I wanted to be invisible. Because people in your world don't ask questions about invisible people. Jackson studied her for a long moment. Then he set his phone down, leaned forward, invaded her space in a way that felt both threatening and intimate. My mother likes you. First person in 20 years who speaks her language, who understands her culture, who doesn't look at her like she's a museum piece from a dead world. He glanced at Evangeline, who was watching this exchange with undisguised interest. Then back to Claire. I need someone to be her companion. Someone who speaks Creole, who plays chess, who sees things. Claire's heart hammered. You want me to babysit? I want you to be her personal assistant. Jackson's voice remained soft, gentle, the tone somehow more terrifying than shouting. You'll live at the estate. $5,000 a week, plus I'll cover Ethan's medical bills. All of them. Clinical trials, experimental treatments, whatever he needs. The offer landed like a physical blow. $5,000 a week, Ethan's life saved. Everything she had been fighting for, handed to her on a silver platter by a man whose business card read, organized crime. But nothing was free, especially from men like Jackson Beaumont. What's the cost, she asked. Your invisibility. You work for me, you're visible. You're part of my world. People will know your face, know you work for the Beaumonts. There's no going back to invisible after that. And if I say no? Jackson shrugged, one shoulder, elegant, casual. Then you go back to scrubbing glasses somewhere else. Ethan keeps declining, you keep drowning. Eventually you slip under and don't come back up. The usual story. Evangeline spoke for the first time in several minutes. Say yes, child. Or I'll have Carter break both your hands so you can never play piano again. Can't make a living with broken hands. The threat delivered with a smile, velvet wrapped around steel. Claire looked at the chessboard, at the pieces still frozen in the position of Jackson's defeat. She thought about her father, about his voice teaching her to see patterns, to find the move no one expected. She thought about Ethan, pale and hopeful and dying slowly while she fought battles she couldn't win. Jackson held out his hand. Do we have an understanding? Claire looked at that hand, manicured nails, calluses from handling weapons, a family crest ring on his right hand, magnolia blossoms engraved in platinum, the hand of a man who had killed people, Who would kill again? Who was offering her brother life in exchange for her soul? She thought about her father's last lesson, the one he had taught her the day before the accident that wasn't an accident. Sometimes, Claire Bear, survival means making deals with the devil. Just make sure you know the price before you shake his hand. She knew the price. Invisible was safety, visible was danger. But invisible couldn't save Ethan. Claire reached out, took Jackson's hand. His grip was warm and firm and completely encompassing. It felt like falling and being caught at the same time. "Yes," she said, "we have an understanding." Jackson's storm gray eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary. Then he smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and made him look younger, almost human. "Good. Get your things. You're coming with us tonight." And just like that, Claire Morrison stopped being invisible. She stepped into the light, into danger, into a world where coffee ceremonies could end in violence and chess games could change everything. She didn't know it yet, but in that moment, in that handshake, in that single word, yes, she had set in motion forces that would lead to blood and betrayal and a battle for survival. But she had also just saved her brother's life. Sometimes that was the only move left on the board. Checkmate. The Beaumont estate crouched on the North Shore like a fortress pretending to be a home. 20 acres of manicured grounds surrounded by walls that spoke of paranoia and power in equal measure. Guard stations disguised as garden cottages. Security cameras hidden among magnolia branches. Men with earpieces and concealed weapons walking patrol routes timed to the second. Claire watched it all from the back seat of Jackson's SUV. Evangeline sat beside her, humming something that might have been a lullaby or a funeral dirge. The melody drifted through the leather interior, mixing with the smell of expensive cologne and the particular scent of fear that clung to Claire's skin despite her best efforts to project calm. 3 weeks. That was how long she had been living in this world now. 21 days of learning how to exist in the space between servant and family. How to pour coffee for a woman who judged your worth by the angle of the cup. How to move through rooms where men discussed murder over breakfast as casually as other people discussed weather. 3 weeks of watching Jackson Beaumont and trying to understand the contradiction he represented. A man who quoted Marcus Aurelius while ordering executions, who played Chopin on the music room piano at 3 in the morning when he thought no one was listening, who had paid for Ethan's experimental treatment and without hesitation and never mentioned it again, as if saving lives was simply what one did between more important business. The estate's main house rose before them, antebellum architecture transplanted north, white columns gleaming in the afternoon sun. It looked like something from a different century, a monument to a South that had never really existed except in the memories of people who needed to believe their ancestors had been noble instead of just rich. Claire's room occupied the east wing, second floor, a guest suite larger than the apartment she had shared with Ethan. 4-poster bed with linens that cost more than a month's rent. A piano, an actual Steinway baby grand sitting in the corner like furniture, casual as a chair. The first time she had seen it, she had stood in the doorway for 10 minutes, unable to process that someone would just put a concert-quality instrument in a guest room as decoration. She played it every night, Chopin mostly, the nocturnes her father had loved. Sometimes she would look up from the keys to find Jackson standing in the hallway, listening. He never spoke during these moments, never interrupted. Just listened with an expression she couldn't read, then disappeared back into whatever darkness occupied his nights. Evangeline had claimed Claire completely. Every afternoon at 4, they sat in the music room for coffee and chess. Real coffee now, prepared the way Evangeline's grandmother had made it in New Orleans before the world changed. Claire learned the stories embedded in every ritual. How the chicory had been added during the Civil War when real coffee became scarce. How orange flower water had come from the French Creole tradition of making everything beautiful, even survival. The chess games were brutal. Evangeline played with 50 years of practice and zero mercy. She won 7 games out of 10, but the 3 Claire won, she earned. "You're learning," Evangeline said one afternoon, studying the board where Claire had just executed a complex sacrifice. Not just the moves, the philosophy. Chess is not about the pieces. It's about understanding what your opponent fears. "What do you fear?" Claire asked before she could stop herself. Evangeline's storm gray eyes, so like her son's, fixed on Claire with unsettling intensity. "Being forgotten, having my culture die with me, watching my son become so hard that he forgets there was ever softness in this family." She moved her queen, trapping Claire's king in 3 moves. "Checkmate, again. You're still too hesitant with your queen. Stop trying to protect her. Queens are meant to be dangerous." The words echoed in Claire's mind now as the SUV pulled up to the main entrance. Carter opened the door, his face professionally neutral. He had been watching Claire for 3 weeks with the expression of a man who suspected a bomb but couldn't find the detonator. Mrs. Beaumont, Miss Morrison. He offered his hand to help Evangeline out. Then Claire. His grip on Claire's hand tightened just slightly. Warning or threat, the message was the same. I'm watching you. Jackson emerged from his study as they entered. He had shed his jacket, rolled his sleeves to the elbow. The casual gesture somehow made him look more dangerous, not less, like a predator deciding whether to hunt in formal wear or not. The senator confirmed for tomorrow night, he said to Carter. Then to Evangeline. The gala, Governor Reeves's charity event, Navy Pier. Evangeline waved one hand dismissively. Another evening of pretending we're civilized while everyone mentally counts their blood money. It's necessary, Mama. Castellano will be there. The name dropped like a stone into still water. Dominic Castellano, head of the Italian operations on the docks. The Beaumont's primary rival for control of Chicago's waterfront. There had been an incident 2 weeks ago. Someone had taken a shot at Evangeline's car. The bullet had missed, but the message was clear. The old agreements were breaking down. Jackson's eyes found Claire. You're coming. Not a question. Claire's stomach tightened. I don't understand what I would do there. You'll be my fiancée for the evening. Cover story explains why you're present, and you'll listen. People say things around beautiful women they think are decorations. You'll hear things I need to know. The word beautiful landed strange. Jackson said it clinically, like he was describing a useful tool. But something in his eyes suggested he meant it differently than his tone conveyed. I don't have anything to wear to something like that. Evangeline laughed, delighted. Oh, child, that's what stylists are for. 2 days later, Claire stood in front of a full-length mirror and barely recognized herself. The stylist had transformed invisible into visible, into dangerous. The dress was emerald silk that matched her eyes, cut to suggest rather than reveal. Her hair swept to one side in waves that belonged in old Hollywood. Evangeline's pearl choker at her throat, borrowed for the evening. She looked like she belonged in Jackson's world. That was the point. That was also the problem. Jackson appeared in the doorway, stopped. For 3 full seconds, he just stared. Then he crossed the room, moving with that predatory grace that made every gesture look choreographed. You're not invisible anymore, he said softly. His hand reached up, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture felt intimate, dangerous. This might complicate things. What things? Everything. He stepped back, breaking whatever moment had formed between them. Stay close tonight. Don't wander. Castellano's people will be watching for weakness. The Navy Pier ballroom glittered with Chicago's elite, politicians and criminals mixing so thoroughly that Claire couldn't tell which was which. Maybe there was no difference. Her father had believed in law and order, in the idea that civilization required rules. Looking at this room, Claire wondered if he had been naive or if she had become cynical. Perhaps both were true. Jackson's hand rested on the small of her back, guiding her through the crowd. Every eye tracked them, the gentleman and his mysterious new companion. Claire felt the weight of curiosity, calculation, women assessing a rival, men assessing an opportunity. Dominic Castellano held court near the bar, short and broad, wearing a tuxedo that cost more than a car. His smile never reached his eyes as Jackson approached. Beaumont, didn't expect you tonight. Thought you might be too busy investigating that unfortunate incident with your mother's vehicle. The words dripped with false concern. Jackson's expression remained pleasant, deadly. My mother is resilient, Dominic. Takes more than amateur hour to rattle a Beaumont. Amateur? Castellano's smile tightened. If it had been my people, your mother would be dead. I deal in certainties, not warnings. Claire felt Jackson's hand press slightly harder against her back. Control. He was controlling his temper through sheer will. Something to remember, Jackson said softly. Then to Claire, darling, I need champagne. The endearment sounded natural, practiced. Claire wondered how many women had played this role before her, how many had survived the experience. She drifted away from Jackson's protection, moving through the crowd with the practiced invisibility that 3 weeks of visibility hadn't completely erased. She was hunting now, listening for the things people said when they thought no one important was paying attention. The terrace doors stood open, letting October wind carry voices into the night. Claire caught fragments. Business talk, gossip, nothing useful. She was about to turn back when she heard it. A southern accent. Wrong. Castellano's people were Italian-American. Why would one of them sound like Louisiana? Claire moved closer to the terrace doors. Two men stood in the shadows, their voices low but carrying on the wind. One voice she recognized immediately. Carter, Jackson's best friend, his enforcer, his brother. The other voice was educated, smooth, unfamiliar. He suspects nothing, Carter was saying, thinks it's Castellano. All his attention focused on the Italians. Good. The smooth voice carried satisfaction. The syndicate appreciates your service, Mr. Wade. Jackson Beaumont has become problematic. Too independent, too sentimental. His father understood the hierarchy. The son needs to be reminded. Claire's blood turned to ice water. Not Castellano, not the Italians, something else, something worse. When do we move? Carter asked. Soon. The codes for the East Gate have been altered. When the time comes, our people will have clear access. We eliminate Jackson. We eliminate the old woman. Chicago falls to us. Clean, efficient. Claire's hand found the terrace door frame, gripping it to keep from shaking. 10 years. Carter had been with Jackson for 10 years. Childhood friends, brothers in everything but blood. And it had all been a lie, an infiltration, a long game played by something called the Syndicate. She needed to move, needed to warn Jackson, but her heel caught on the stone threshold. She stumbled, caught herself. But not before her champagne glass slipped from nerveless fingers and shattered on the terrace. The sound cut through the night like a gunshot. Who's there? Carter's voice. No longer smooth, hard, dangerous. Claire ran. She pushed back into the ballroom, heart hammering against her ribs. The crowd that had seemed elegant now felt suffocating. Bodies everywhere, faces turning to look at the woman running in an evening gown. She needed Jackson, needed to find him before Carter found her. There, by the windows overlooking the lake, talking to the mayor, 60 feet away through a sea of people who moved too slowly. Claire abandoned elegance, pushed through the crowd with desperate strength, grabbed Jackson's arm hard enough to bruise. We have to leave, right now. Jackson turned, annoyance shifting to alarm when he saw her face. Claire, what happened? She leaned in close, whispered in Louisiana Creole, the code Evangeline had taught her, the old language for old dangers. Danja, Lakay, Carter. Danger, home, Carter. 3 words, enough. Jackson's entire body went rigid. His storm-gray eyes scanned the crowd, found Carter emerging from the terrace doors, looking for something, looking for Claire. Governor, my apologies. My fiancé isn't feeling well. Jackson's voice stayed perfectly level. Southern gentleman to the end. We must leave. He didn't wait for a response. His hand gripped Claire's and they moved. Not running. That would draw attention. But walking with purpose that parted the crowd like water. The valet brought Jackson's car, not the SUV, his personal vehicle, an Aston Martin that looked like violence sculpted in metal and midnight blue paint. Jackson held the door for Claire, played the gentleman even as his eyes tracked every shadow. The engine roared to life. Jackson didn't speak until they were on Lakeshore Drive, the city lights blurring past at speeds that made Claire grip the leather seat. Talk. Tell me everything. Claire told him, every word she had heard, the syndicate, the altered gate codes, the plan to eliminate Jackson and Evangeline both. Carter's betrayal. Jackson's hands tightened on the steering wheel. For a long moment he said nothing, just drove, the engine's growl the only sound. Then quietly, Carter's been with me since we were kids, since my father died. He taught me how to shoot, how to fight, how to survive. I'm sorry. Don't be. Jackson's voice had gone flat, empty. The tone of a man putting away every feeling that might make him weak. You did what needed to be done. You warned me. That's more than most people would have the courage to do. He took a turn too fast, the car sliding through the curve with precision that spoke of practice, of other high-speed escapes, other nights when survival required speed and steel. We're going to the estate, but not through the front. There's another way in, something Carter doesn't know about. The car 8 miles. Claire watched Jackson's profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the way his eyes stayed fixed on the road with absolute focus. This was what he looked like when the gentleman mask fell away, when the predator underneath showed through. What happens now? Claire asked. Now? Jackson's mouth moved into something that might have been a smile, if smiles could cut. Now we finish the game. Carter made his move. Time to see if he planned for checkmate. The estate appeared ahead, dark against the darker sky. Jackson killed the headlights, navigated by moonlight alone. He turned off the main road onto what looked like nothing, a deer path, overgrown, forgotten. My father showed me this when I was 12, Jackson said, maneuvering through the trees. Said every king needs a secret way home. Carter never knew. He thought he knew all my secrets. They emerged behind the estate walls, a service entrance hidden behind 20 years of ivy growth. Jackson punched a code into a mechanical keypad, numbers that meant something, a date maybe, or a promise. The door clicked open. Jackson pulled a gun from under his seat, checked it with the efficiency of long practice, looked at Claire. Stay behind me. Step where I step. If shooting starts, you run. Understand? Claire nodded. Her voice had abandoned her somewhere between the gala and here. They moved through the gardens, past fountains where water should have been running but wasn't, past flower beds where the magnolias grew in carefully tended rows. Everything too quiet, too still. Then they found the bodies. 2 guards, throats cut with professional efficiency, the kind of killing that required training. That required someone who knew exactly where to cut to ensure silence. Jackson knelt, checked for pulses he knew he wouldn't find. When he stood, his face had become stone. Marcus and Tommy, good men. He said it quietly, a eulogy delivered in the darkness. Then he turned toward the house. They're here, inside, going for my mother. He moved faster now, abandoning caution for speed. Claire followed, her evening gown catching on branches. The silk tore, she didn't care. Fashion meant nothing when people were dying. The kitchen entrance stood open. Wrong. Everything about this was wrong. They slipped inside. Darkness and silence. The house felt dead, waiting. Jackson moved through the halls by memory. Claire stayed close, her breathing loud in her own ears. She could hear her heartbeat, could hear the rustle of her dress, could hear everything except what she was listening for. Where was Carter? Where were his people? They reached the grand staircase. Light spilled down from above. And voices. Jackson froze, listening. Then the lights blazed on. Carter stood at the top of the stairs, 6 men behind him, armed, professional, not house guards. These were soldiers, mercenaries, the kind of men who killed for money and slept fine afterward. Carter held a glass of bourbon in one hand. Jackson's bourbon. The 20-year Pappy Van Winkle from his private study. The gesture was deliberate, insulting. I'm in your house, drinking your whiskey, and there's nothing you can do about it. Welcome home, boss, Carter said, the word boss dripped with mockery. Jackson raised his gun, steady, aimed at his best friend's chest. Where is my mother? Safe for now. Depends on how reasonable you're feeling. I'm feeling very unreasonable, Carter. Carter smiled, genuine amusement. Yeah, I figured. That's always been your problem, Jack. You feel too much. Your father, he understood. This is business, nothing personal. But you make it personal. You make it about honor and loyalty and all that Southern gentleman bullshit. He took a sip of bourbon, savored it. The syndicate offered me what you never could. Respect, real power. Not this pretend legacy game you're playing. Chicago is changing. Either change with it or get swept away. Jackson's gun never wavered. Last chance. Where is my mother? Carter's smile faded. You're not getting out of this, Jack. I control the house. I control the guards. I control everything. You're finished. Then he raised his rifle. But nothing happened when he pulled the trigger. Just a click. Empty. Impotent. Jackson's smile was cold. Terrible. You forgot something, old friend. After Marcus accidentally discharged a weapon 2 weeks ago, I installed biometric locks on every gun in the armory. They only fire for me. Carter's face went white. You were always too confident, Jackson said softly. Always thought you were smarter than everyone else. But you forgot the first rule. The house always wins. He fired. The sound shattered the silence. Carter dropped, clutching his shoulder. The mercenaries scrambled for their sidearms. But Jackson was already moving. Violence unleashed. Controlled chaos that looked like a dance choreographed in blood. Claire pressed against the wall, watching a man she thought she knew become someone else entirely. 3 men down in as many seconds. Clean headshots. Professional. Cold. Carter crawled toward the stairs, leaving a trail of blood, trying to escape, trying to survive. But Jackson's storm-gray eyes had gone black. You were my brother, Jackson said, standing over Carter. Gun pointed down. Executioner's stance. I would have died for you. That's why you were always going to lose, Carter gasped, blood bubbling at his lips. You cared. Caring is weakness. No, Jackson's voice was soft, final. Caring is what separates us from monsters. The gun spoke again. Carter stopped moving. Claire stood frozen. She had just watched a man die. Watched Jackson Beaumont execute his best friend in cold blood. The gentleman mask completely gone. This was the truth underneath. The killer who could play Chopin and quote philosophy and murder without hesitation. Jackson lowered his weapon, looked at Claire. For a moment, something vulnerable showed in his eyes. Then it disappeared behind walls of necessity. My mother, we need to find her. They ran through the house, past bodies, past evidence of a battle that had ended before it truly began. Up to Evangeline's suite. The door stood open, the room ransacked, empty. On the bed, a note, typed on expensive paper, formal, professional. Jackson read it aloud, his voice dead. Mr. Beaumont, you survived the Judas. Impressive. Now face the king. Your mother is at the River Street warehouse. Come at dawn. Alone, the syndicate. He crumpled the paper in his fist. For a long moment, he just stood there. Then he turned to Claire. His eyes held something she had never seen before. Fear. Real fear. They have my mother. Claire stepped forward, took his hand. The hand that had just killed his best friend. That would kill again before this ended. She held it anyway. Then we go get her back. Jackson looked at their joined hands, then at her face. Something shifted in his expression. Recognition. Understanding. In 3 weeks, she had gone from invisible to indispensable. From nobody to the one person standing beside him when everything fell apart. The game ends at dawn, he said quietly. Then we finish it. Claire squeezed his hand. Checkmate. The word hung between them. Promise and threat. They had 12 hours until dawn. 12 hours to plan, to prepare, to decide if they would survive or die trying. Outside, sirens began to wail. Someone had heard the gunshots, called the police. The normal world intruding on this dark kingdom where men made their own laws. But Jackson and Claire stood in the wreckage of betrayal and looked at each other with the understanding that comes from shared survival. They had crossed a line tonight. Both of them. There was no going back to invisible, no going back to safe. There was only forward. Into whatever waited at the River Street warehouse, into whatever checkmate the syndicate had planned. But they would face it together. The invisible girl and the gentleman killer. Partners in a game where the stakes were life and death and everything in between. Dawn was coming, 3 hours until dawn. The River Street warehouse waited in the industrial wasteland of South Chicago like a monument to decay. Jackson stood in his study, surrounded by blueprints and satellite imagery, planning an assault with the precision of a general going to war. Claire watched him work, watched the transformation from gentleman to soldier, and understood that she was seeing the truth of who Jackson Beaumont had always been underneath the elegant suits and classical music. Carter's body had been removed, the blood cleaned, the house already returning to its facade of civilization. But the betrayal hung in the air like smoke, bitter and choking. Jackson's phone rang. He answered without looking at the screen. Marcus, I need the full tactical package. Everything. 30 minutes. He hung up, looked at Claire with eyes that had gone cold and calculating. The eyes of a man who had shut off everything that might make him hesitate. You don't have to come, he said. You've done enough. More than enough. I can have someone take you to Ethan. Keep you both safe until this is finished. Claire thought about that offer. Safety. Invisibility returned. The smart choice. The survival choice. Everything her father had trained her to do screamed at her to take it. She thought about Evangeline, the lonely matriarch who had adopted Claire like the daughter she never had, who taught her chess and coffee ceremonies, and what it meant to carry culture in your bones when everything else had been washed away, who had looked at Claire and seen worth when the rest of the world saw nothing. I'm coming, Claire said. Jackson studied her face, looking for doubt, for fear, finding both and something else underneath, determination. The kind that came from having already lost everything and discovering you could survive it. You killed a man tonight, Jackson said quietly. Carter, you saw what that was, what I am. Most people run after seeing that. Most people haven't watched their father get murdered for trying to do the right thing. Claire met his eyes, held them. Most people haven't had to choose between morality and survival. I chose survival. I chose Ethan. I choose this. Something shifted in Jackson's expression, the walls he had built around himself cracking just slightly. He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides, took her face in both hands. The gesture was gentle despite the violence those hands had committed hours before. After tonight, there's no going back. You'll have blood on your hands. Real blood. Not just witnessing it, participating in it. That changes you. Changes everything. I know. Do you? Do you really understand what you're signing up for? Claire thought about her father, about the promises she had made to protect Ethan, about the 3 weeks she had spent in this world learning that morality was a luxury purchased by people who didn't have to make impossible choices. I understand that your mother is the closest thing to family I've had since my father died. I understand that the syndicate won't stop with you and Evangeline. They'll come for everyone connected to you, including me, including Ethan. She paused. I understand that sometimes the only way to survive monsters is to become one. Jackson's thumb brushed her cheek. The touch was achingly gentle. Then he leaned forward and kissed her. Not the performance kiss from the gala. Real. Desperate. The kiss of a man who had just lost his best friend and found something unexpected in the wreckage. Claire kissed him back, tasting bourbon and violence and something that might have been hope if hope still existed in this dark world they inhabited. When they pulled apart, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. When this is over, he said quietly, assuming we survive, we're going to have a conversation about what this means, about what we are. What are we? I don't know yet, but I know I've never met anyone like you, anyone who saw all of me and didn't run. A knock interrupted them. Marcus entered, carrying 2 heavy duffel bags. He was older than Jackson by a decade, bald and tattooed and carrying himself with the particular confidence of someone who had survived multiple wars and expected to survive several more. Brought you the good stuff, boss. He dropped the bags on Jackson's desk. Unzipped them. Inside, enough weapons to start a small war. Heard about Carter. Always knew that boy was rotten underneath. Jackson selected a Sig Sauer, checked it with professional efficiency. We're going into the River Street warehouse. Syndicate's got my mother. Unknown number of hostiles. Marcus whistled low. That's a kill box, boss. Open floor plan. Catwalks at 40 feet. Sight lines for days. They'll have shooters in the high positions. I know. Jackson loaded extra magazines, tucked them into a tactical vest. That's why Claire's going in through the loading dock. North side. Get to the catwalks. Be my eyes. Marcus looked at Claire properly for the first time. Assessment in his gaze. She know how to shoot? My father taught me, Claire said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. I can handle it. Can you kill? Marcus asked bluntly. Because handling a gun and putting a bullet in someone are different things. One's technical, others spiritual. Claire thought about Carter, about the sound of Jackson's gun, about the moment life became death. I can do what needs to be done. Marcus grunted, handed her a compact Glock. Subcompact. Easier to handle. 15 rounds, aim for center mass. Don't try to be fancy. And for God's sake, don't hesitate. Hesitation gets you killed. Claire took the weapon, felt its weight, its promise, its terrible potential. She had crossed so many lines in 3 weeks. What was one more? Jackson holstered his weapons. Multiple guns, knife. The tools of his trade arranged with the care of someone who knew exactly how to use each one. He looked at Claire. Last chance to change your mind. Oh, stop asking me that. The ghost of a smile touched his mouth. Yes, ma'am. They drove through Chicago's sleeping streets in Jackson's Aston Martin. The city looked different at 4 in the morning. Empty, honest, without people to perform for, the buildings and streets revealed themselves as what they really were. Just concrete and steel. Just places where people lived and died and pretended it all meant something. Jackson killed the headlights as they approached the warehouse district. Navigated by moonlight and memory, the River Street warehouse rose before them, a skeleton of rust and broken glass. It had been beautiful once, back when Chicago was a manufacturing power, when men could work honest jobs and make honest livings, before the factories closed and the jobs disappeared and people like Jackson's father filled the vacuum with businesses that lived in shadows. My father started here, Jackson said quietly. He had stopped the car 3 blocks away. Safe distance. 40 years ago, smuggling cigarettes and bootleg whiskey, small-time operation. He built it into an empire. What was he like, your father? Augustus? Jackson stared at the warehouse. Hard, fair. He had rules. No drugs, no human trafficking, no hurting civilians. He believed you could be a criminal and still have honor. He laughed bitter. Carter used to say that made him weak. That honor was just another word for limitation. What do you think? Jackson looked at her. I think my father died taking a bullet meant for me. I think honor got him killed. But I also think he died believing in something. That counts for more than people realize. He checked his weapons one final time. The loading dock is 200 yards north. There's a service entrance. Should still be accessible. Get inside. Get to the catwalks. Wait for my signal. What's the signal? You'll know it when you see it. He touched her face. Quick, gentle. Be careful, Claire. I just found you. I'm not ready to lose you. Then don't get killed. I'll do my best. Claire slipped from the car. The October wind cut through her tactical gear, borrowed from Jackson's armory. Too big on her frame but functional. The Glock sat heavy in her waistband. She moved through the darkness, using shadows and abandoned machinery for cover. The service entrance waited exactly where Jackson said it would be. The door hung crooked on rusted hinges. Claire eased through, every sense heightened to painful clarity. Inside, the warehouse stretched vast and empty. Moonlight filtered through broken skylights, creating patterns of light and shadow on the concrete floor. She could see Evangeline, center of the space, tied to a chair under a spotlight. Blood matted her silver hair. Her dress was torn, but her posture remained defiant, even captured, even beaten. Evangeline Beaumont refused to bow. 8 men surrounded her, professional, armed, moving with the coordination of trained soldiers. And at the center of it all, a man Claire had never seen before. Tall and lean, wearing a suit that cost $5,000. Silver hair perfectly styled, cold eyes that calculated profit margins in human suffering. Vincent Cross. Had to be. Leader of the syndicate. The king they had been chasing. Claire found the ladder to the catwalks, started climbing, hand over hand. Silent as prayer, the metal was cold under her palms. Rust flaked off, drifting down into darkness. She reached the catwalk, 40 feet above the floor. Perfect vantage point, perfect kill box. She found a position with clear sight lines, settled in to wait. The Glock felt alive in her hands, warm despite the cold metal. She thought about her father, about all the lessons he had taught her, about the moment he had put a gun in her 14-year-old hands and said, "Sometimes survival requires terrible choices." She understood now what he meant. The main doors crashed open. Jackson walked in, alone, hands visible, unarmed as far as anyone could see, playing the role they expected. The gentleman coming to negotiate for his mother's life. Vincent Cross smiled. It was the smile of a shark that had just smelled blood. "Jackson Beaumont, so good of you to join us. Punctual as always. Your father would be proud." Jackson stopped 20 feet from his mother. His eyes found Evangeline, assessed her condition. Claire saw his jaw tighten. The only sign of the rage that must be burning underneath that calm exterior. "Let her go, Cross. This is between us." "Oh, but she's integral to the message, you see." Vincent circled Evangeline's chair like a professor delivering a lecture. "The syndicate believes in efficiency, in ruthlessness. Your father understood the old ways, honor among thieves. Your mother clings to culture and tradition. And you?" He gestured at Jackson. "You try to be both, criminal and gentleman, killer and philosopher. It's quite tedious, actually. Is there a point to this speech, or do you just enjoy hearing yourself talk?" Vincent's smile tightened. "The point, Mr. Beaumont, is that your family's time is over. Chicago needs modern leadership. Leadership that understands profit over principle, that recognizes sentiment as weakness." He pressed a gun to Evangeline's temple. "Any last words before I demonstrate exactly how weak sentiment makes you?" In the catwalks, Claire's heart hammered. She had a shot. Maybe. Vincent's head was partially visible behind Evangeline. But if she missed, if the bullet went through, she would kill the woman she had come to save. Jackson's voice cut through her panic. Calm, clear, the voice of a man who had already seen the end of this game and made his peace with it. "You made one mistake, Cross." "Oh, do enlighten me." "You assumed I came alone." Jackson's hand moved, faster than thought. A gun appeared from somewhere, ankle holster maybe. He fired, not at Vincent, at something behind the syndicate leader. Claire saw it in that split second. An old steam pipe, industrial, pressurized, forgotten but still functional. Jackson's bullet hit the valve. Perfect shot, impossible shot. The pipe exploded. Superheated steam blasted outward in a deafening roar. Vincent screamed, stumbled forward, away from Evangeline, away from his human shield. Claire didn't hesitate. Center mass, just like Marcus taught her. She squeezed the trigger. The Glock kicked in her hands. The sound was thunder in the enclosed space. Vincent jerked, Red bloomed across his expensive shirt. He looked down at the spreading stain with something like surprise, as if he couldn't quite believe that he was mortal after all. He fell, but his 8 soldiers didn't fall. They opened fire. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Jackson moved like violence given human form. Every motion economical, precise, deadly. 2 men down before they fully registered the threat. He used the concrete pillars for cover. Fired, moved, fired again. Each shot finding its target. Claire provided covering fire from above. Her hands steady despite the adrenaline screaming through her veins. She had become someone else in this moment. Not the invisible waitress, not even Claire Morrison. She was something forged in 3 weeks of survival and the moment of pulling the trigger. A soldier spotted her position. Bullets sparked off the steel beam near her head. Claire rolled, found new cover, returned fire. Center mass. The soldier dropped. She had killed 2 men now. Vincent Cross and this nameless soldier. Some part of her knew she should feel something. Horror, guilt, remorse. But all she felt was the cold clarity of survival. The understanding that in this moment, it was kill or die. And she chose to live. Below, Jackson fought his way to his mother. Cut her bonds with a knife that appeared in his hand like magic. Evangeline sagged against him for half a second, then straightened, grabbed a fallen soldier's gun, started firing alongside her son. Claire watched mother and son fight back to back. Watched Evangeline, 70 years old and beaten, refuse to be a victim. Watched Jackson become the man his father had trained him to be. This was the Beaumont legacy, not culture or tradition, not honor or philosophy, just the raw will to survive against overwhelming odds. The last soldier fell, silence crashed down, broken only by heavy breathing and the distant wail of sirens. Someone had heard the gunfire, called the police. The normal world was coming. Jackson helped his mother to her feet. She touched his face, gentle, maternal. The first truly soft gesture Claire had seen from her. "You came for me," Evangeline said. "Always, Mama, always." Then Jackson's eyes found Claire in the catwalks. Something passed between them. Recognition, understanding. They had crossed into darkness together, had killed together, had survived together. Claire climbed down. Her legs shook on the ladder, adrenaline crash hitting hard. By the time she reached the ground, she was trembling so badly she could barely stand. Jackson caught her, held her steady. "You did good. You saved her. You saved us both." "I killed people," Claire whispered. The words tasted like ash. "I know, and you'll have to live with that. We all do." He looked at the bodies scattered across the warehouse floor, at Vincent Cross lying in a spreading pool of his own blood. "But you saved lives too. That has to count for something." Evangeline crossed to Claire, looked at her with those storm-gray eyes that saw everything. Then she did something Claire never expected. She pulled Claire into a fierce embrace. "You are my daughter now," Evangeline said. Her voice was hoarse, broken, but certain. Not by blood, by choice, by loyalty, by the only things that matter. Claire clung to her. This woman who had judged her and tested her and ultimately claimed her, who had given her belonging in a world where she had been invisible. "We need to move," Jackson said. "Police will be here in minutes. Marcus is waiting 2 blocks south with a clean car. We go now." They ran, 3 people covered in blood and gunpowder residue, running through Chicago's industrial wasteland as the sky began to lighten with approaching dawn. The city was waking up, returning to its daily performance of civilization. But they had seen what lived underneath, had become part of it. There was no going back to innocent. 6 months passed like a dream or a nightmare. Claire couldn't decide which. The syndicate collapsed without Vincent Cross. The remaining leadership scattered. Some arrested, some disappeared. Some reached out to Jackson to negotiate new arrangements. He met with them in the garden room, made deals, established territories, built a new order from the ashes of the old. Ethan's treatment succeeded. The experimental therapy that Jackson had paid for without hesitation worked. 6 months of hell, 6 months of watching her baby brother fight for his life. But he won. Remission. Complete remission. The doctors called it a miracle. Claire called it the only good thing to come from her deal with the devil. Ethan knew now, knew what Claire had done, what world she inhabited. He had looked at her with eyes too old for 19 and said, "You saved my life. Whatever you had to do, whatever you had to become, I'm alive because of you. That's all that matters." She wanted to believe him. Jackson transformed the business, slowly, carefully. moving money from illegal operations into legitimate investments, real estate, technology startups, venture capital. He would never be completely clean. Men like Jackson Beaumont didn't get to walk away, but he was building something different, something that might eventually exist in daylight instead of shadow. The Magnolia Room was closed for renovation. When it reopened, it would be under new management, legitimate management. Claire's name on the deed, Director of Operations. She who had scrubbed glasses now owned the building. Jackson had given it to her without ceremony. Just handed her the papers one afternoon while they played chess in the music room. "You earned this," he said. "You saved my mother, saved me. This is what that's worth." She had stared at the papers, at her name in legal ink, proof that she existed, that she mattered, that invisible had become real. Now she stood in front of a mirror in Evangeline's suite, wearing a dress that cost more than her first car. Champagne silk, Art Deco beading, the kind of dress that belonged in museums or movies, not on the body of a girl from nowhere who had stumbled into this world by speaking a dying language to a grieving matriarch. But here she was, about to marry a criminal who played Chopin and quoted philosophy and killed without hesitation, about to become Claire Beaumont, about to make permanent what had started as survival. Evangeline appeared behind her in the mirror, wearing cream silk and diamonds, silver hair perfect, every inch the matriarch. But when she looked at Claire, her eyes were warm. "Nervous?" "Terrified," Claire admitted. "Good. Terror means you understand what you're doing, that you're choosing this with open eyes." Evangeline adjusted Claire's pearl necklace, the pearl she had worn the first night they met. "You don't have to do this, child." Jackson would understand. He'd hate it, but he'd understand. "Do you want me to walk away?" "What I want doesn't matter. What do you want?" Claire thought about that question, about the past 6 months, about watching Jackson slowly open up, slowly let her see the man underneath the killer, the way he played piano in the middle of the night when nightmares woke him, the way he visited Ethan in the hospital, bringing books and chess problems and treating her brother like family, the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, like she was something precious, something worth protecting. "I want this," Claire said. "I want him, all of him, even the dark parts." Evangeline smiled. "Then you're ready." The ceremony took place in the garden room, under the magnolia tree that bloomed year-round. 250 guests, politicians and criminals, the distinction meaningless at this level. Ethan sat in the front row, healthy, whole, wearing a suit Jackson had bought him. He would start medical school in the fall. Johns Hopkins. Full scholarship. Jackson had made one phone call, and suddenly every door was open. That was power. Real power. Not violence, not threats, just the ability to change lives with a word. Claire walked down the aisle alone. No one to give her away. She belonged to herself. Had fought too hard for that belonging to surrender it even symbolically. Jackson waited at the altar. Black tuxedo, magnolia boutonniere, storm gray eyes locked on her face, watching her approach with an expression she had learned to read over 6 months. Love. Complicated and dark and absolutely certain. She reached him, took his hand, felt his fingers close around hers. Strong, steady, the hand of a killer. The hand that had held her through nightmares about the men she had killed. The hand that promised protection and partnership in equal measure. The officiant spoke words about love and commitment, words that felt inadequate for what they were promising each other. This wasn't a fairy tale. There would be no happily ever after. Just survival. Just the choice to face darkness together instead of alone. When it came time for vows, Jackson spoke first, his voice quiet but carrying in the silent room. "Claire, you saw me when I was invisible to myself. Saw past the masks I wore, the gentleman, the killer, the son trying to honor his father's memory. You saw all of it and didn't run. You stood beside me in the worst moments, killed beside me, survived beside me. I can't promise you safety, can't promise you a normal life, but I promise you partnership, equality, a love that doesn't flinch from truth." He paused. "You turned invisible into indispensable, nobody into somebody, and you showed me that maybe honor isn't weakness after all. Maybe it's just choosing who you protect. I choose you. Every time. Forever." Claire felt tears on her face. She hadn't cried in 6 months, not since the warehouse, not since she became someone who could kill and survive and keep going. But she cried now, "Jackson. 3 months ago I was nobody. Invisible. Drowning. You gave me a choice. Save my brother or stay invisible. I chose survival. I chose visibility. I chose you. And I would make the same choice every time. She squeezed his hands. You're not the gentleman you pretend to be. You're also not just the killer underneath. You're both. You're complicated. You're capable of beauty and violence in equal measure. And I love all of it. The piano at 3 a.m., the way you quote Marcus Aurelius, the absolute certainty in your eyes when you're protecting the people you love. I choose you, all of you, light and dark, forever. The officiant pronounced them married. Jackson kissed her, gentle at first, then deeper. The kiss of a man who had thought he would spend his life alone and found something better than solitude. The reception blurred, toasts and champagne and dancing. Evangeline pulled Claire aside at one point, handed her a small box. From my mother. She gave it to me on my wedding day. Now I give it to you. Inside a ring, old gold, a single pearl, simple, beautiful, the kind of jewelry that carried history in its metal. She wore this when she danced at Congo Square as a girl. When jazz was born, when the world was changing and we were all trying to survive the change. Evangeline slipped it onto Claire's finger. Now you wear it. You're the future of this family, the bridge between what we were and what we're becoming. Claire looked at the ring, at the weight of history and expectation, at the choice she had made to be visible, to matter, to survive. I won't let you down. Oh, child, you couldn't if you tried. You're already everything I hoped for and more. Later, much later, Claire stood on the terrace overlooking the gardens. The party continued inside, music and laughter and the sound of people pretending tomorrow wasn't coming. Jackson found her, wrapped his arms around her waist, rested his chin on her shoulder. Regrets? He asked. None, you? Only that I didn't find you sooner. He turned her to face him. I have something for you, wedding present. He handed her papers, legal documents. She scanned them, her name, over and over. Deeds, bank accounts, ownership stakes. This is half of everything, she said. You're my partner. That means equal in everything. Jackson, this is too much. No, it's exactly right. He touched her face. You're not my possession, Claire. You're my equal, my partner, my queen. This just makes it legal. She looked at the documents, at proof that she existed, that she mattered, that invisible had become powerful. What happens now, she asked. Now we build something new? We change the game. We survive. He smiled. Together. Claire thought about her father, about all his lessons, about the moment he had taught her chess and said every move has consequences, good and bad. You just have to decide which consequences you can live with. She had made her choice, had killed for it, had become someone new for it, had gained family and purpose and love in exchange for innocence. She could live with those consequences. Together, she agreed. And somewhere in the city, in a hospital room where miracles happened and brothers survived, Ethan Morrison looked at his medical school acceptance letter and thought about his sister, about the choices she had made, the darkness she had walked through, the price she had paid for his life. He would honor that price, would become the doctor she had made possible, would save lives to balance the lives she had taken. It wasn't redemption. Redemption was for fairy tales. This was just survival. Just the choice to keep going despite everything. Just checkmate. The game was over. The pieces returned to the box. And Claire Morrison Beaumont stood on a terrace in the moonlight, wearing a dead woman's pearl ring and her own hard-won power, and understood that invisible had been the beginning. Visible was forever. Dawn was coming, but for now, in this moment, there was only the music and the man and the choice she had made, and it was enough, the end.